Okay, this is going to be a tutorial on how to draw a an eye in profile view. So since you cannot see your own eye in profile, I'm going to be using this reference photo. All right, so let's move this over just a little bit so that we can see the brow as well. So we're going to draw the eye, but we're also going to draw the brow bone and the eyebrow and this space around the eye as well. So that's going to be important. We're going to start out by following this tutorial, and I also have this other example down here which shows this idea of how the eyeball is this spherical muscle that actually fits inside the eye cavity of the skull. And then we've got the brow bone, the skull, and the eyelid, which is skin and muscle, wrapping around that sphere. So, and that's why we're starting out with a sphere here in our underdrawing. So I'm going to start out with this fairly light red pen to do my underdrawing. So I'm going to start with a big sphere like so. And then I'm going to draw this kind of protruding area. And I'm going to draw this triangle around that. And this triangle is going to be this triangle. All right, so I'm going to now move this over just a little bit. Oh, I'm going to try to. Let's see. There we go. And move this over just, oh, I do not seem to be having great luck here. I'm going to try to move that over a little bit like so. And so one thing, as you are doing this on your paper, make sure you leave enough room over here because over here, we're not really going to be doing much of anything, but over here, we're going to have the brow, and over here, we'll have the edge of the nose as well. All right, so now I'm going to move that over and make that a little bit bigger. So we're focusing on really where the eye is. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to this part of the tutorial. All right, so within this kind of protruding area, I'm going to draw an ellipse, essentially. So something like that. And then I'm going to draw this part of the eyelid wrapping around that part of the eye. So, but I am going to look off of this. So the proportions are going to be a little bit different. So in this example, they've got a much larger eyelid. And on this one, that upper eyelid is not as big proportionally to the rest of the eye. All right, so I'm just going to follow what I see. All right, so I'm going to start up here. And you know what? I am going to switch to my gray now. Okay, so I'm going to say, all right, this is going to be what I'm doing here with the eyeball itself. So I'm going to make that like that, and I'm looking at this line and this line here. And then I'm going to start the eyelid. So I'm going to say, okay, I think the eyelid's about there. Something like that. And I'm making this just a little bit angular and coming around. Now here it's a little bit obscured, so I can't see exactly what's going on behind the eyelashes. So I'm just trying to guess. And then it's going to come around and kind of in front here, and it actually goes in a little bit and then out like so. Okay, and then down here, I can kind of see this part kind of wrapping around here. So right there, I'm actually seeing that kind of part, and this kind of angle there within that. All right, so let's see, what do I want to do next? All right, so out here and out here, notice I haven't fully connected these. All right, this is just kind of wrapping around. All right, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure that I do some more of this line drawing here. So this inner edge of the eye, this lid goes on top, and this kind of comes in here. I'm going to try to make this just a little bit darker so you can see that a little more clearly. So I'm going to actually make this like this so we can see this here. It's like this really pink narrow part there. All right, coming right in front there. Something like that. All right, and then we're going to see how that does this, and this is that part right there. Let's see. What else do we need to get in here? We can also start to get in this basic form of the eyelash. All right, so we're going to do this like so. All right, now notice rather than drawing the individual lashes here, I'm kind of drawing this as a basic shape. So those lashes are kind of doing this kind of thing there. All right, if we're going to break that down into like a planar analysis, that's kind of what is happening there. So here is behind, and then here this is kind of curving and doing this, that front plane. All right, so each individual lash is kind of doing this within there. All right, so I'm drawing this as kind of a basic shape in here so far. All right, then I also, and that corresponds with this right here. All right, so now I want to go ahead and draw the pupil, and that's also going to be an ellipse. So I'm going to follow my my reference photo here and draw this pupil kind of a little bit closer to this back part. And I can actually erase a little bit in there. All right. And then I'm also going to have the highlight. So I want to draw in that highlight. So I've kind of been finding where I'm going to put this a little bit. So I'm going to go back in and draw that, something like that. Okay. Let's see, what else? Notice here I'm drawing this kind of shape over here, which is going to kind of be some of the shadow back here. So I could kind of loosely put that in, something like this. I'm also kind of seeing this kind of shape out here. So there's kind of another shadow. And I'm seeing that kind of then working into this kind of side plane of the nose, something like that. And depending on how much room you have on your page, then I've even got this and this. So you may remember this from drawing the planar view of the head, and this part right here, right in line with the eye, this is that angle going up to the brow, which would be kind of over here. And then here is the nose angling out like so. And I'm noticing here there's kind of a little bit of a subtle kind of space in between. So I'm going to get that in. And notice this whole space is about as large as this whole space of the eye. So if that's a little bit too close, I could just move it out just slightly. So I might do that. Okay, so I'm not just drawing the eye, I'm also drawing this space around it. Okay, let's see. I think that pretty much then brings us to this part of the tutorial down here. So I can also start to work in, I think I'm going to erase a little bit some of this underdrawing where I don't necessarily need it. But I'm going to kind of draw in some of, just very lightly, some of what's happening here with some of these shadows that indicate some of these different plane changes around the eye. So I might say, okay, I see a shadow kind of here and maybe doing something like this. And I'm actually seeing some highlights up here. And maybe I see a little bit of shadow over here. I'm gonna erase a little more of this pink underdrawing. All right, and then I'm also seeing up here, there's gonna be some shadow in here and definitely some shadow here. Okay, and this part of the brow is gonna correspond with the eye socket, where up here it's protruding because this is gonna be the brow, and then this is coming back into the head a little bit more where the eye is recessed a little bit. So I want to really pay attention to this space up here and where the brow is fitting into this. So if I'm going to kind of measure this, maybe to the top of the brow looks like it's going to be about as big as from here to here, let's say. That might be about the same. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure that. Yep. All right, so about this, and then I want that to be about here. And lo and behold, that's going to take me up here to the top about of that circle, which makes sense because that would be corresponding with the eye socket. So the eye socket being that empty space that's framed by the brow bone and then the cheekbone. All right, so our brow bone will be about up there, and that's about where the eyebrow is going to be. So I'm going to make that a little smaller again. Okay, and where does this peak here line up with the eye? Well, I'm just looking. It looks like it lines up with about this iris. So I'm going to try to line it up with the iris. So it'll be about there, and then I'm drawing this angle down a little bit and drawing this shape out and down. Okay, so I'm looking at also how much space is here. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe I got that a little bit too high, just judging from the amount of space I have. So I might have it come down just a little bit and then thin out here. And that's getting me about the basic shape that I'm seeing here as I adjust it just a little bit. So I know, so how do I know where to adjust it? Again, I'm looking at this negative space. Okay, all right, and then that takes it so that this eyebrow is basically touching this shadow, and that's what I'm seeing here, and that's perfect, that makes sense. And then again, I can adjust this part of the face for what I see over here. And I'm seeing over here just a little bit of that eye and that eyebrow kind of poking out over here in my reference photo. All right, so I'm going to come back now to the foreground and I'm moving towards this. So here I'm going to start to fill in some of these dark areas. So here, and I'm going to start with the eyelashes. I'm going to also shade in the colored part of the iris. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this a little bit thicker in an attempt to get a little bit of a more even shading with my digital tools here. You guys will be using pencil maybe a little bit of charcoal, something like that. All right, so I'm getting some shading in. I'm going to shade the pupil in, and I'm just working around that highlight. Except for that kind of, there's a part in the center there of that highlight that's a little darker. All right. That's about it. Okay, so, and what else? So I can actually look behind that iris as well. So here I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger, and I'm gonna see how there's kind of this, almost this like white, almost like an outline there. But then behind that, there's a space that's in shadow. And then we've got some shadow here behind this kind of lid there. And then also some shadow here behind this far part of the inside corner of the lid, and the tear duct would be over here. And then this whole area here is kind of in shadow. And then the top part of the lid is also an area that's in shadow. And so some of this here, so initially I kind of gave these hard edges to some of these shadows, but I would blend these a little bit more. So I might start with hatching like this, but since you guys are using pencils, you could then smudge this a little bit. And then you might then have to go back in and make this part, say, a little bit crisper. But I'm just gonna erase a little bit here of that pink area, but I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna shade it more now with my kind of pencil tool. I'm gonna kind of bring this shadow up here behind there. And I can also shade kind of generally this area of the brow. And again, if I were using an actual pencil, then I would smudge that. As far as I know, I don't have a smudging tool over here in this program. Okay, then I'm gonna have this kind of come back over here, and this area would also kind of be in shadow. I want to get rid of that hard line. I want this to kind of more generally be in shadow. And notice over here, I've also kind of outlined some shadows that are here. This whole area is kind of in shadows, not all of equal darkness. So I might go and make some of these parts a little bit darker. Here, notice, again, this is like a plane change. We've got this like highlight here. So around that highlight, how do you draw a highlight? Well, you shade around it. You leave it white and shade around it. I've got this side plane of the nose. All of this, though, I can leave pretty much unshaded. Now, again, I don't really want like a hard edge here, so I might erase that, but that's kind of where I would stop with the shading. And then over here, this edge, I might shade into this negative space if I want this edge of the nose to be lighter than this space around it. As I'm doing these, I can also make these kind of hash lines up here to kind of curve, as I would curve up and over that side of the nose a little bit. All right, and I'm now going to make this lash area a bit darker as well. And I'm almost at the part now where I'm going to have to start delineating those a little more. But before I do that, I'm going to continue shading down here. I want to get a little more shading on this part of the eyelid. And then underneath the eyelid, that top eyelid is actually literally on top of this bottom lid. And then this is creating this kind of shadow here, which is helping to create this form. All right, and then we've got this highlight here. And depending on how much you can fit on your page, maybe then I'd also come back and do some of this shadowing I see up here on that upper part of the cheekbone. All right. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and erase some of this. All right, but I might actually replace that with a little bit of shadow there. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I am going to make this a little bit darker again. No, I don't need it darker there, but I'll make it darker there. There we go. And I'm going to start to bring out some of these lines. I'm going to start here. These are going to be the hardest because those are coming straight out at you. I'm going to start over here. These are some of the easiest to see because you're seeing them in almost more of a side view. So see how they kind of turn, they're all sort of turning slightly different directions. And some of them then are going off this way. And they might actually be coming from this side over there. Here, we're seeing a few do this, but then they're doing this. And then a few you might even see do this along the side. And I can clean up some of this a little bit. Okay, let's see. And I can also draw some of these lashes here as well. So those are growing out of right here. And they're doing something like this. But again, we don't want them to be all completely equal, and we don't want them to take over. If I do too many, they're going to start to just kind of completely take over. And you also want to see too, even though you see some of these, you also have some other shading going on there. So I might then pull that back a little bit more and make sure that the shading of the lashes doesn't take over so much that it's just completely dominating some of these other forms that are going on around it. And so I can shade in this part of the eye a little bit. And I'm looking to see here if you can see some of these structures in here, some of these light and dark kind of patterns of the iris. You might make this part of your shading now kind of emulate that. That said, though, you want that to be over top of that base you did earlier that was kind of a more generalized approach to the shading. If you just start with all of those little lines, it's gonna kind of take over and be too much. All right, and then I also want this to be really right behind that, and I want to show that little part of the eye too has some shading to it. So I'm almost creating this kind of sheen here to the front part of the eye. All right. I also want to get in the individual hairs of the eyebrow up here. So I'm going to make these darker again to do these individual hairs. So notice the direction that the hairs are growing in. So here we have them kind of laying down. And then here they're growing from up here and kind of going straight up and then starting to angle farther and farther, and they're kind of overlapping each other as they come over here. So something like that. Try to get rid of that red pen a little bit. right. And that's pretty much what we want there. And then I can follow around some of them even a little bit closer down here. And kind of coming over, and we'll have a few of them then over here on the other side of the nose there, on the other side of the face. All right, and that is just about gonna do it. I can continue to add a little bit more shading. Again, if I were doing this in pencil or charcoal, I would use my blending tool a little bit and then come back in to kind of sharpen up areas. So I'd go back and forth between using one and the other. One area too that as I'm looking at this area, I can actually use a little bit more shading. So in here, the eyelid is on top of that white part of the eye. So even though the color of it is white, it's actually got some shadow on it as well. All right, and there you go. That's pretty much your eye drawing. I'm going to get rid of some of my up close details of the lashes, and there we go. All right, good luck guys. Happy drawing.